Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. You can also check out the podcast on Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. I'm joined today by a film blogger from Scotland, Amy Smith. She runs the Film for Thought blog, which I've contributed a couple pieces for her occasional Ultimate Choice series, where she asks film fans for their favorites of the topic, whether it's Tarantino films, whether it's foreign films, whether it's Disney, Pixar. It's always fun to contribute to that and see what other people contribute to it. And I'm pleased to be joined by Amy Smith today. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on.
So, what first drew you to want to write about film?
It was more of a mandatory decision rather than a choice, because in my media course at college, we got told you have to write a blog and you have to maintain it for about 6 months to get the credit. And I was like, everyone else decided to do just personal things or like travel. And I was like, well, the only thing I have that I can write about is film. So that's where it started. And everyone gave up on their writing after 6 months, but I fell in love with it. I was like, you know what? It's not costing me anything. I'm just going to keep up with this and see where it goes.
Yeah, and that's definitely a that's I really enjoy reading your blog when I get a chance to, and it's always great to be able to contribute to it and contribute to the discussion, and that's one of the things that I like about the it's one of my favorite parts about being part of the quote unquote film Twitter world, where a lot of us especially are independent. We have our own blogs, we have uh, our own way into discussing films, and being able to share that with each other and get feedback going back and forth, and then having discussions. Sometimes the discussions get considerably worse as they go along, but especially for some of the blogs like yours, one of the things that I really appreciate about is everybody welcoming other voices to the process, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about that community.
Yeah, I've kind of got the idea from the fact that I wanted to discuss films with other people and not just have my voice, but I couldn't really do that in my area because I know maybe one other person that likes film as much as me. So it felt very empty to just not be able to talk about it to people. So that's where I found the film Twitter community, and I actually felt like I had people to speak to and to learn about other things. Like the best thing about the Ultimate Choice for me is that I get to learn about other films I wouldn't have even considered, and potentially open myself to new films that I can go and watch and enjoy myself.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, when I read some of the choices, it's like you get an idea of what inspires other people about films, and it is fun, like you said, to have other films opened up to you. Like, I haven't seen that one, maybe I need to give that a chance. And That's one of the things that I really appreciate, because there are actually a lot of movies that um, people on Twitter talk about that, like, I never necessarily would have. I was curious about, but I wasn't necessarily certain that I wanted to see, and then seeing the passion towards it, or seeing the discussion towards it, really makes me interested to see it. So um, that's one of the great things about that community. Why? What was it about films that you first fell in love with in terms of just watching them?
For me, they were escape. So, like, I first really got into films when I was 16, 17 years old. I was struggling in school, didn't have anyone to really speak to. My entire pathway leading to that was I'm going to do art. but school drained all the enjoyment out of art for me. So I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I picked media as a subject on a whim, and we started watching Psycho and analysing it. And it was kind of at a moment I knew I found the thing I'm good at and that I really want to do in talking about films and analysing them. So it was really just the luck of just having to pick that subject because I had nothing else to choose and just going from there.
Mm-hmm. When you first started really diving deep into films, I've kind of had this discussion with other people, and one of the things I think one of the common elements, and this was certainly the case for me when I started to really fall in love with movies, was basically one film leading to another, whether it's because of a filmmaker, whether it's because of an actor, a genre, and just sort of going from there. Now, I mean, obviously, it sort of leaves some blind spots open, but eventually I make my way into those blind spots. So I'm kind of curious, when you, after watching Psycho, where did that sort of lead you as far as watching films more critically?
I think that led me down the Oscar path because once I started thinking critically about films, I wanted to know what made films so good. And the first pathway to that is okay, what's considered the best? What's considered like the end all be all of films? And I started just looking at Oscars and looking more critically into, oh, what's going to get nominated, what's going to win, what should win. And for the past, I'd say 2 to 3 years, I've been more focused on Oscars and all that rather than
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
Yeah, and I mean that was certainly one of those things where when I first started to really center in on films. I mean, following the Oscars was definitely was definitely kind of a gateway to getting into independent films more, and then those filmmakers on occasions, and then basically just going from there into some of the great ones that are still working, as well as some of the ones that had passed on long before then. And what are some of the filmmakers and films that you have? What are some of your favorite filmmakers and films that you've discovered over the years?
Oh, I think the big one for me is Alfred Hitchcock, starting with Psycho, and since then I've also gone on to study Vertigo in uni, and we just continue to learn about him. I'm not really more focused on directors unless I focus on a specific collection. Like last year, I did my first run through of Tarantino, and I think that opened up to my eyes to see some patterns, some basically like the style of directors and how that's influenced. But I usually just judge films on their own merit rather than
Mm-hmm.
focusing specifically on one director.
Yeah, and I think that's, to a certain extent. I think that can be definitely a good way of approaching it, because of the fact that you you run the risk of. I mean, I think one of the things that is a bit hard to do when it comes to films is that we become overly attached to certain filmmakers. I mean, I know that's kind of been the case with me, and it gets very tribal as far as really obsessing over certain filmmakers over other filmmakers. And I mean, I certainly have my favorites, but at the same time, it's one of those things where I've really started to be less interested in talking about specific filmmakers, and more just dealing with films in general, or looking at similarities in certain films, and trying not to elevate certain filmmakers over others, because of the fact that there's certainly different things that filmmakers do well over other filmmakers.
I have that problem more with genres rather than filmmakers. So particularly horror and musical are
Mm-hmm.
like the two where I'm overly either critical or overly overpraising, depending on how good or bad they are. Because
Yeah.
I love two genres, it's completely different genres, but I love them both so much.
Well, and the thing is, it's like that. It's funny that you mentioned those two genres because they do kind of, and this was something that the A's All Over podcast actually put in my head when they talked about Friday the 13th Part Two, like they sort of likened the slasher genre to the musical genre and the way they operate in terms of structure, where it's like you have lulls of dialogue, character development, all of that, and then you have a kill, which is essentially the musical sequence, and then you have another one a few minutes later and a few minutes later, and it basically goes on like that. So I know for me, especially starting, like I was overly critical about horror as well. It wasn't until several years later when I first really started to dive into it. It's funny. I basically started devoting October's to horror, and so that basically was my excuse to get into some of the horror films that I hadn't gotten into over the years, and I started to have a bigger appreciation of the genre because of that.
I think with genres like that, you really need to have an appreciation for them because they're incredibly hard to do if you don't do them
Yeah.
right. They have to be pretty much perfect, or else they're going to fall, whether it's on tone or the music's not right, or there's a lot of things that can go wrong with those
Hmm.
two genres.
Yeah. What would you say is probably your favorite genre of film, if you have one?
Musicals,
Yeah.
easily musicals.
Yeah, I admittedly like I'm more sci-fi, I'm more genre. Musicals, I have to admit there are still quite a few blind spots I have in my um musical watching, and like there are so few real I feel like there are so few really good ones that have come out in the past couple decades. It's really hard to get into it unless you're starting to really watch the classics, I think.
It's just about finding them, and it doesn't just have to be strictly the musical format that we know where you're singing and dancing the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a great example is Sing Street from 2015
Yeah.
2016, which is a film that has a lot of music in it, but it's not structured like a musical, so it's a lot easier for people who are just starting to get into it to maybe potentially watch that, get used to a lot of music, but not done in a cheesy or corny way whatsoever, like is associated with the genre.
Yeah, and he's a filmmaker because I loved Once when it came out in the states in 2007, and I am a big fan of Sing Street, and I think he's I think he's one of the few filmmakers I think that has really done a great job of bringing really fun musical songbooks to the film to cinema and being able to tell personal stories as well. I think that's one of the that is one of the things that um make him such a strong filmmaker when it comes to that.
No, absolutely. I think most people who have shown Sing Street 2 just fall in love with it. Like, there's just something about it that you just can't help but enjoy.
Um, so we're at a very interesting point of time here where we're basically movie theaters are essentially closed. I know we've had several independent theaters in the U.S. that have popped up. Have they've started to do drive-in presentations and stuff like that to help um, financially get through this time. But we've basically had a summer where independent films have and Netflix and Hulu and all of that has basically dominated the movie landscape. It's how have you managed to what have you done as far as how most of the films that you've been watching over the past few months without new releases in theaters, how have you been watching most of your films? Have you been doing the video on demand or mainly streaming?
I've done one video on demand so far, and that was Never Really, Sometimes Always.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's been Disney Plus because we got Disney Plus access basically the day of the lockdown, so like middle of March.
Yeah.
So a lot of my time has been spent consuming classics from there, which I've been trying to cover. With Hamilton just coming out, a rewatch of Frozen 2 for the first time since I saw it. So it's been balanced, but also I don't work well attention wise sat in a home. I have to be in a cinema to fully focus. So that's why I've not gotten through too many movies.
Mm-hmm.
But what I have done is Netflix put up Modern Family for the first time. So 20-minute sitcoms, I can manage no problem.
Yeah. No, it's and yeah, I mean there is something about watching movies in there is something about watching them in the theater that it's easier to just focus everything to just tune everything else out when you don't have the distractions. I mean it's we my wife and I have been watching we've done full watches of like X-Files and Bones and stuff like that over the past few months. I mean, we also watch a lot of movies, but I've mostly been just watching movies as far as like screeners that I've gotten and or catching up on movies on stuff like Criterion Channel and Netflix and Hulu and Disney. Not as much Disney Plus, but I did watch Hamilton. And yeah, so it's been interesting, and I mean we're supposed to be opening up theaters in a couple weeks. I seriously doubt that's going to be the case. Um, but we'll see what it's like. It's gonna be really interesting because the to see what movies we do end up getting in theaters if we get anything by the end of the year, and basically what the theatrical landscape is going to look like in 2020 for the rest of 2020 and beyond.
It'll be interesting to see. I know my local cinema, like the independent one, has decided not to open until September just in case.
Mm-hmm.
But in Scotland, we're getting less than 10 cases a day now, so our cinemas should be open by the end of the month.
Okay, yeah. I'm in that part of the states where we continue to see rise in cases per day, and because not enough people are taking it seriously. So I mean, I was originally supposed to go back to work on the 24th of this month, and then it got pushed back when Mulan and Tenet got pushed back because I work at a movie theater, and so now technically it's August, but we'll see how that works out. Because I really would be shocked if either of those movies are out by September the earliest. So
I don't know how the UK is going to cope because, like I said, our cinemas are opening up basically for Tenet and Mulan. They were meant to open up in a few weeks' time, and then they got pushed back, so they decided, right, we're just going to push our cinema back.
Mm-hmm.
So if that keeps happening, even if we have no cases, we might not have anything to show except reruns.
Yeah. Which, I mean, granted, there is something to be said about that because we don't get enough of the older movies that get shown on the big screen. Like, I know Regal, when they were first planning on opening this month, they were showcasing this list of movies, and it's like, oh, I wouldn't mind seeing some of these on the big screen, but at the same time, I just it even even for like some of those movies, it would be hard for me to get worked up to actually go see them at a movie theater, given the way things are going in this part of the world, especially.
Yeah, especially if I was in America, I wouldn't. But
Yeah.
because cases are so low in Scotland, and I've waited 3.5 months, and because I'm a barista, we've been
Mhm.
told we're not opening till at least August, September time. I'm not gonna have anything to do, so
Yeah.
I'm most likely just gonna say screw it. I'm just gonna head down.
Mhm. Well, I know on Film for Thought, one of the things you've been doing recently because of Disney Plus, you've been diving into the classic Disney animated films, and I was kind of curious how that's going for you.
A lot slower than I expected. I thought I'd be a lot more motivated during this time. I thought, I've got no work, no uni, I can't go out and socialize, I'm going to be in lockdown, I'm going to get everything watched. No, I've had several months that I've just not even wanted to write. All I've wanted to do is sit down and watch a sitcom or play a game or just chat online with my friends. So a lot slower than I expected, but I think that's what lockdown done for all of us. It's kind of demotivated us a lot more than we all expected to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that a lot with a lot of people online. Um, I mean, it might be because of the fact that I had a pretty stressful couple months before everything locked down, so I've been kind of looking at this as almost a much needed break. I know I'm certainly privileged in that position, but but at the same time, yeah, I completely understand why people are so stressed out. I mean, I we're stressed out because of the fact that I'm asthmatic, my wife is diabetic, and my mother is up there in age, and it's one of those things where I mean, we are all high risk for getting this, so it's like we basically don't leave the house unless we absolutely need to, and so it is one of those things. If you're if you're not as motivated as you probably thought, I certainly completely understand that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this is such a weird part this is such a weird moment in history that we're in. And because of the fact that there's been a lot of inconsistency with the way people have handled it, it makes it even more stressful.
I think it was just me also being naive. I was like, oh, it'll be 4 or 5 weeks. I can find things to do during that time. No problem. What it turned out to be was 14, 15 weeks as of right now. We've missed, like, out of my group of friends, 3 birthdays already,
Mm-hmm.
including my own and my boyfriend's. Uh, Hardly been able to see him at all because of the fact we don't live together. In fact, my mum's a care worker, so I've seen, like, what could seriously happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been it's been a lot harder than I first initially thought it was going to be.
So what do you have uh what do you have coming up as far as film for thoughts? Like, do you have any other things that you're looking to do as far as any other writing that you're looking at? I know that you've just posted your midway through 2020 list, which is a very good list, by the way, of the movies I've seen. I think there are like two or three of the movies I haven't seen, but it's a really terrific list of films.
I think I got lucky with that because the UK always gets the Oscar movies late.
Yeah,
So because of that, I've been able to say, yeah, Parasite, one of my best movies of the year that I've seen so far.
yeah.
I've not been struggling for content that wise. But I've got a couple more reviews I've still got to get done that I've just been in the backlog. I also want to try and get more game reviews because I have been playing a lot more video games ever recently.
Mm-hmm.
So I may as well try and include that as another alternative.
Okay. All right. Where can people find you online?
They can find me online on Twitter, which is Films with Amy, or over on my blog, which is www.filmforthought.co.uk.
All right. Well, Amy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank Amy for joining me on the podcast today. It's been good to take this time of quarantine and COVID-19 to get to know some of the fellow podcasters and bloggers that I have started to know on Twitter and get to know them a little bit better on my podcast. And I definitely hope to have them on for further discussions. And that's it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema podcast. The next one's going to be a pretty personal one. I discuss my experiences watching movies with my grandfather, who passed away 20 years ago, and it's a pretty personal one. It means a lot to me, and I hope you enjoy that. In August, there's going to be some discussion on different types of films, different filmmakers, and I hope you enjoy those. A quick housekeeping thing that Dragon Con is officially canceled. The physical event is canceled this year, but they are going to be doing something virtually. My plan is to cover and do something on Dragon Con this year, whether it's a written blog, whether it's a podcast, to keep that tradition going, even though the physical event is being postponed until 2021. I am currently slated for covering the Fantasia Fest Film Festival in August, and I'm looking forward to that. There are some great films coming up on that. And as far as I know, the Atlanta Film Festival is still going in September. So that's it for right now for the Sonic Cinema podcast. Hit me up on patreon.com/Sonic Cinema for early access to reviews, as well as deep dives and just brief thoughts on movies that I watch for the first time, but don't necessarily do a full review for. And thank you for checking out the podcast at Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify, or at the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. This is Brian Scuttle. Thank you very much, and thank you for checking out my work at www.sonic-cinema.com.